The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty hotel in Desdemona, Texas, and Rose Sullivan stepped down onto the wooden planks with legs that trembled from more than just the 3-day journey from San Antonio. It was the summer of 1878, and the heat bore down on her shoulders like a physical weight, but it was nothing compared to the burden she carried in her heart. She clutched her single carpet bag tighter, feeling the eyes of the townspeople on her back as she hurried toward the hotel entrance, her worn brown dress already clinging to her skin with perspiration. Rose had learned to recognize those stares over the past year. They were the looks people gave when they knew what she had been, what she had done to survive after her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a tarnished reputation in Dallas. She had worked in a saloon, serving drinks at first, but when the money ran out and the landlord came calling, she had made choices that now haunted her every waking moment. 3 months of selling herself to keep a roof over her head had been 3 months too many, and when she finally scraped together enough money to leave, she had chosen Desdemona precisely because it was small, remote, and far enough from Dallas that maybe, just maybe, her past would not follow her here. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked her up and down with barely concealed suspicion. "Staying long? I hope to make Desdemona my home," Rose said quietly, meeting his gaze with as much dignity as she could muster. "I am looking for honest work." He grunted and pushed a ledger toward her. $2 a week for the room, payment in advance. Rose counted out the coins carefully, watching her meager savings dwindle. She had enough for perhaps 2 weeks, 3 if she was very careful with food. After that, she would need to find employment, and in a town this size, opportunities for a woman alone were limited. She could sew, she could cook, she could clean. She would do anything honest, anything that would not require her to compromise herself again. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. Rose set her bag down and sank onto the bed, allowing herself one moment of weakness as tears pricked at her eyes. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, worn down by shame and regret. Every decision she had made in Dallas felt like a mark against her soul, a stain that no amount of scrubbing could remove. She thought of her mother, who had died when Rose was 15, and wondered what she would think of her daughter now. Her mother had been a good woman, a seamstress who had taught Rose to value hard work and integrity. Her father had been a gambler who drank too much, and when he died suddenly of a heart seizure, Rose discovered he had left her with nothing but his debts and the contempt of his creditors. Rose wiped her eyes and stood up, squaring her shoulders. Self-pity would get her nowhere. She had come to Desdemona for a fresh start, and she would make the most of it. Tomorrow she would begin looking for work. Tonight, she would rest and try to silence the voices in her head that whispered she was worthless, ruined, beyond redemption. The next morning dawned hot and bright, and Rose dressed carefully in her least worn dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days but was still respectable. She pinned her dark auburn hair up neatly and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her green eyes looked tired, shadowed by sleepless nights and worry, but she forced herself to stand straight and lift her chin. She would not let her shame define her. Desdemona was a cattle town, small but growing, with a main street lined with businesses that catered to the ranchers and cowboys who passed through. Rose walked slowly past the general store, the blacksmith, the bank, and the church, noting each establishment and wondering where she might find employment. She paused outside the general store, gathering her courage, then pushed open the door. The proprietor was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and work-roughened hands. She looked up from arranging canned goods on a shelf and studied Rose with the same assessing gaze the hotel clerk had used. "Help you?" the woman asked, her tone neutral. "I am looking for work," Rose said. "I can keep accounts, I can sew, I can clean. I am a hard worker and I am honest." The woman's expression softened slightly. "What is your name?" Rose Sullivan. "Where are you from?" Rose hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. "Dallas, originally. I arrived yesterday." "Family here?" "No, madam, I am alone." The woman nodded slowly. "I am Mrs. Henderson. I run this store with my husband. We do not need help right now, but you might try the restaurant down the street. Martha Calloway runs it, and she is always complaining about needing an extra pair of hands." "Thank you," Rose said, feeling a flicker of hope. "I appreciate your kindness." Mrs. Henderson's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she understood more than she said. "Good luck to you, Miss Sullivan." The restaurant was a small establishment sandwiched between the saloon and the barber shop. Rose could smell fresh bread as she approached, and her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she had eaten little yesterday and nothing yet today. She pushed open the door and found herself in a cozy dining room with 6 tables covered in checkered cloths. A woman in her 40s emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "We are not open for another hour," the woman said, not unkindly. "I am not here to eat," Rose said quickly. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store said you might need help. I am looking for work." Martha Calloway's eyes lit up with interest. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam, and I can wait tables and clean." "Experience." Rose's heart sank. She could not very well mention the saloon in Dallas. "I kept house for my father before he passed. I have been cooking and cleaning since I was young." Martha studied her for a long moment, and Rose held her breath, willing the woman to see past whatever reservations she might have. Finally, Martha nodded. "I will give you a trial. Room and board plus $3 a week. You will help with cooking, serving, and cleanup. The work is hard and the hours are long. I expect you here at 5 in the morning and you will finish when the last customer leaves, usually around 8 or 9 at night." Relief flooded through Rose so powerfully that she felt dizzy. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. I promise you will not regret this." "We shall see," Martha said, but her tone was kind. "There is a small room in the back you can use. It is not much, but it is clean and private. You can move in today if you like, and start work tomorrow morning." Rose returned to the hotel to collect her belongings, her heart lighter than it had been in months. This was her chance to start over, to prove to herself and everyone else that she was more than her mistakes. She would work hard, keep her head down, and build a new life here in Desdemona. No one needed to know about Dallas, about the saloon, about the men she had been with when desperation drove her to choices she would never have imagined making. She settled into the tiny room behind the restaurant that afternoon, unpacking her few possessions and marveling at how quickly her circumstances had changed. The room was barely large enough for a cot and a small chest of drawers, but it had a window and a door that locked, and it was hers. That was enough. The next morning, Rose woke before dawn and presented herself in the kitchen, ready to work. Martha put her to task immediately, showing her how to prepare the biscuits and gravy that were the restaurant's specialty, how to fry eggs and bacon, how to brew the strong coffee that the cowboys favored. Rose threw herself into the work with determination, grateful for the physical labor that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The customers began arriving at 6, mostly men from the surrounding ranches and farms, along with a few townspeople. Rose kept her eyes down and her demeanor quiet, serving food and refilling coffee cups without drawing attention to herself. She noticed the appreciative glances some of the men gave her, and it made her skin crawl with memories she wanted to forget. She had learned to recognize that look, that assessment, and it never led anywhere good. By the end of her first week, Rose had fallen into a rhythm. The work was exhausting but honest, and Martha proved to be a fair employer who appreciated competence and hard work. Rose began to relax slightly, to believe that maybe she could actually make this work. The shame still gnawed at her in quiet moments, but she pushed it down and focused on the present, on building something better. It was on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed. Rose was in the kitchen kneading dough when she heard Martha greeting someone in the dining room, her voice warmer than usual. Curious, Rose glanced through the serving window and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man standing at the counter was unlike anyone she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the doorway. His hair was dark brown and longer than was fashionable, hanging past his collar, and his face was weathered and tanned from years spent outdoors. But it was his eyes that arrested her, pale blue and piercing, set beneath heavy brows. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple homespun shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. Everything about him spoke of strength and self-reliance, of a man who needed no one and nothing. "Fletcher Finch," Martha said, pleasure evident in her voice. "I was wondering when you would come down from that mountain of yours." Fletcher's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell beneath the full beard he wore. "Needed supplies. Thought I would get a proper meal while I was at it." His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight roughness that suggested he did not use it often. Rose found herself staring, unable to look away. She had seen plenty of men in Dallas, men who thought themselves strong and impressive, but this man was different. There was no swagger, no performance. He simply was, solid and real and utterly male in a way that made her feel oddly breathless. "Sit anywhere," Martha said. "I will bring you the usual." Fletcher chose a table near the window and settled into the chair, which looked too small for his frame. Rose ducked back into the kitchen, her heart pounding for reasons she could not quite name. She focused on the bread, punching the dough with more force than necessary, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest. "Rose," Martha called, "bring out coffee for Fletcher, would you?" Rose wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the coffee pot with hands that trembled slightly. She walked into the dining room, keeping her eyes fixed on the cup she was filling. She could feel Fletcher's gaze on her, measuring and steady, and it made her more nervous than any of the other customers had. "Thank you," he said as she poured, and Rose made the mistake of looking up and meeting those pale blue eyes. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. There was something in his gaze that was not like the looks the other men gave her. It was not assessing her as a woman to be pursued or used. It was more curious, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle. "You are welcome," Rose managed and fled back to the kitchen before he could say anything else. Martha came in a moment later, shaking her head with amusement. "Fletcher has that effect on people. He is a mountain man, lives up in the hills west of town. Comes down maybe once a month for supplies. Good man, just not much for company." Rose nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, the way it had seemed to see right through her. She told herself it did not matter, that he was just another customer who would eat his meal and leave. But when she glanced through the window again, she found him watching the kitchen door, and something in her chest tightened painfully. Fletcher ate slowly, savoring Martha's cooking as he always did. But his attention was not on the food. It was on the young woman who had poured his coffee, the one with the auburn hair and green eyes that held shadows too deep for someone her age. He had noticed the way she carried herself, the careful way she moved as though trying not to draw attention, and he recognized it for what it was: fear, And beneath the fear, shame. He had seen that look before on wounded animals and broken people. It called to something in him, some instinct that was equal parts protective and curious. He wanted to know her story, wanted to understand what had put those shadows in her eyes. And more than that, he wanted to take them away, to see what she would look like when she smiled. The thought surprised him. Fletcher had lived alone in the mountains for 5 years, ever since he left his family's farm in Missouri after his parents died. He had never been comfortable around people, preferring the company of trees and streams and the wildlife that populated his corner of the world. Women, in particular, made him uneasy. They always seemed to want things from him, conversation and courting and promises he did not know how to give. So he had kept to himself, visiting Desdemona only when necessary and keeping his interactions brief and businesslike. But this woman was different. She did not look at him with expectation or calculation. She looked at him with the wary caution of a deer ready to bolt, and something in that wariness spoke to him. He understood what it meant to be wounded, to carry scars that no one else could see. When he finished his meal, he left payment on the table and stood to leave. Martha emerged from the kitchen to bid him goodbye, and Fletcher found himself asking, "The woman who served the coffee, is she new?" Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. "Rose, yes, she has been here about 2 weeks. Why do you ask?" Fletcher shrugged, uncomfortable with the question himself. "Just wondering. She seems capable." "She is," Martha said, studying him with a knowing look that made Fletcher want to leave immediately. "Hard worker, keeps to herself. I think she has had a rough time of it, though she has not said much about her past." Fletcher nodded and turned to go, but the conversation stayed with him as he collected his supplies from the general store and loaded them onto his mule. Rose. Even her name was soft and lovely, like the wildflowers that grew in the mountain meadows. He told himself it did not matter, that he would probably not see her again for another month. But as he headed back up the mountain trail, he could not shake the image of her face, the way her eyes had widened when she looked at him, the faint tremor in her hands. 3 weeks passed, and Rose settled more firmly into her new life. The work at the restaurant was demanding but rewarding, and she was grateful for Martha's patient instruction and occasional words of encouragement. She had made no friends in Desdemona, preferring to keep to herself and avoid questions about her past, but she felt safer than she had in months. The routine gave her life structure, and the honest work helped quiet some of the shame that haunted her. She found herself thinking about the mountain man more often than she wanted to admit. Fletcher Finch. Even his name was solid and strong like the man himself. She had asked Martha about him, trying to sound casual, and learned that he had a reputation as a skilled hunter and tracker, that he occasionally guided hunting parties or helped search for lost travelers, but that he mostly kept to himself in a cabin he had built with his own hands somewhere in the hills. Rose told herself that her interest was purely idle curiosity, but she knew she was lying. There had been something in the way he looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. She had been looked at by plenty of men, but never like that. Never as though she mattered, as though she were more than just a body to be used. She was wiping down tables one afternoon when the door opened and Fletcher walked in. Rose's heart jumped into her throat, and she nearly dropped the cloth she was holding. He was even larger than she remembered, his presence seeming to fill the entire restaurant. He nodded to Martha and chose the same table by the window, settling into the chair with the same economical grace. "Rose, would you take Fletcher's order?" Martha called from the kitchen, and Rose wanted to refuse, wanted to make some excuse, but that would only draw attention to her discomfort. So she smoothed her apron, picked up her pad and pencil, and approached his table with what she hoped was professional composure. "Good afternoon," she said, keeping her eyes on her pad. "What can I get for you?" "Whatever Martha recommends," Fletcher said in that quiet, rough voice. "And coffee." Rose nodded and turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "You are Rose." It was not a question, but she nodded anyway. "Yes." "I am Fletcher, Fletcher Finch." "I know," she said, then flushed, embarrassed that she had revealed she had asked about him. "Mrs. Calloway mentioned you." He nodded, seemingly unbothered by her admission. "How are you finding Desdemona?" The question was simple, but something in his tone suggested genuine interest. Rose looked up, meeting those pale blue eyes, and felt that strange breathlessness again. "It is a good town. I am grateful to be here." "Where did you come from?" Rose's throat tightened. She did not want to lie to him, but she could not tell him the truth either. "Dallas," she said finally. "I needed a fresh start." Something flickered in Fletcher's eyes, some understanding that suggested he knew there was more to the story but would not press. "Fresh starts are good," he said quietly. "Sometimes necessary." Rose nodded, relief flooding through her. "I will get your food," she said, and escaped to the kitchen. Martha was ladling stew into a bowl and raised an eyebrow when Rose entered. "Having a conversation with Fletcher Finch." "That is unusual. The man barely says 10 words on a normal day." "He was just being polite," Rose said, busying herself with pouring coffee. Martha said, and Rose could feel the woman's speculative gaze on her back. "Fletcher does not do polite. If he is talking to you, it means he is interested." Rose's hand stilled. "Interested in what?" Martha laughed. "In you, girl. Do not tell me you have not noticed the way he looks at you." Rose shook her head firmly. "He is just a customer, and I am not looking for anyone's interest. I am here to work and build a better life, nothing more." "Nothing wrong with a little companionship," Martha said gently. "You are young and pretty, and Fletcher is a good man. Rough around the edges maybe, but honest and decent. You could do a lot worse." "I am not looking to do anything at all," Rose said, more sharply than she intended. She could not explain to Martha that she felt unworthy of any man's interest, let alone a man like Fletcher. She was ruined goods, tainted by her past, and the idea of someone like him looking at her with anything other than contempt, once he knew the truth, made her feel sick. She brought Fletcher his meal and refilled his coffee, careful to avoid lingering or encouraging conversation. But when she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Rose." She stopped but did not turn around. "Yes. If you ever need anything, I have a cabin about 3 hours west of here, up in the hills. Anyone in town can give you directions." Rose turned to look at him, confused. "Why would I need to know that?" Fletcher met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes people need help. I am good at helping." There was no suggestion in his tone, no improper implication. He was simply offering the way a person might offer a glass of water to someone parched. But it touched something deep in Rose's chest, something she had thought was dead. When was the last time anyone had offered her help without expecting something in return? "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is very kind." Fletcher nodded and returned his attention to his meal, and Rose fled once more to the safety of the kitchen. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing, and tried to understand what was happening to her. She barely knew this man. He was a stranger, a mountain man who lived alone and spoke in short sentences. There was no reason for him to affect her this way, no reason for his simple kindness to make her want to cry, but it did. It cut through all her defenses and touched the raw, wounded part of her that she tried so hard to hide. And that terrified her more than anything else. Fletcher rode back up the mountain that afternoon with his mind full of Rose. He could not explain why he had offered his help, why he felt drawn to protect a woman he barely knew. It was not like him to reach out to make connections. But there was something about her that called to him, something broken that he wanted to fix. He thought about the way she had flinched when he spoke to her, the way she kept her eyes down as though afraid to be seen. He thought about what Martha had said, that Rose had come from Dallas looking for a fresh start, and he wondered what she was running from. Poverty, most likely. Maybe an abusive family. Maybe debts or scandal. It did not matter to him. People's pasts were their own business. What mattered was who they chose to be now. And Rose was choosing to be honest and hardworking, choosing to build something better. Fletcher respected that. He understood it, because he had made the same choice when he came to Texas. He had left Missouri not because he wanted to, but because staying meant watching his parents' farm fall into ruin without them, meant trying to fill shoes he was not ready to fill. So he had sold the land, packed what he could carry, and headed west in search of something he could not name. He had found it in these mountains, in the quiet solitude and the hard work of building a life with his own hands. He had built his cabin log by log, hunted and fished and trapped to survive, learned to read the weather and the land and the animals. He was not lonely exactly. He was self-sufficient. But sometimes, in the long winter nights when the wind howled around his cabin, he wondered what it would be like to have someone to talk to share the burden and the beauty of this life he had chosen. He had never met a woman who made him think those thoughts could become reality. Until now. The weeks turned into a month, and Fletcher found himself coming down to Desdemona more often than was strictly necessary. He told himself it was because he needed supplies, because he wanted a decent meal, because it was good to maintain connections in town in case he needed help with something. But the truth was, he came to see Rose. She was always busy, always moving, but she had started to relax around him, to offer small smiles and brief conversations. He learned that she loved to read but had few books, that she missed having a garden, that she dreamed of one day owning a small piece of land where she could grow flowers. He learned that she was quick with numbers and had a gift for remembering details, that she had a dry sense of humor that occasionally broke through her careful reserve. And with each visit, Fletcher found himself more captivated. It was not just her beauty, though she was beautiful in a quiet, understated way. It was the strength he saw in her, the determination to keep going even when she was clearly carrying heavy burdens. It was the kindness she showed to the other customers, the way she listened patiently to old Mr. Peterson's rambling stories, or brought extra biscuits to the ranch hands who worked long hours for little pay. Rose noticed Fletcher's increased visits, and she did not know what to make of them. Part of her was terrified that he would ask questions she could not answer, that he would discover her shame and look at her with disgust. But another part of her, a part she tried desperately to ignore, looked forward to seeing him, to the quiet steadiness of his presence, and the way he seemed to understand things without her having to explain them. She found herself watching for him, noting when his usual schedule would suggest another visit was due. And when he walked through the door, her heart would lift in a way that was both wonderful and terrifying. She had never felt this way about anyone, this strange mix of nervousness and anticipation, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. It was early September when everything came crashing down. Rose was closing up the restaurant late one evening, tired from a long day when 3 men stumbled in through the door. She recognized the signs immediately: drunk, rowdy, looking for trouble. Her stomach clenched with dread, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I am sorry, gentlemen, but we are closed for the evening," she said, keeping her voice polite but firm. The largest of the 3, a thick-necked cowboy with mean eyes, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. We just want some food, sweetheart. That is not too much to ask, is it? You can come back in the morning, Rose said, moving behind the counter to put a barrier between them. We open at 6. We do not want to wait until morning, the man said, stepping closer. His companions spread out, blocking the door. We want service now. And maybe a little something extra if you are feeling friendly. Rose's heart hammered in her chest. She had been in situations like this before back in Dallas, and they never ended well. Please leave, she said, hating the tremor in her voice, or I will call the sheriff. The man laughed. The sheriff is 3 drinks deep at the saloon. He is not going to help you. He leaned across the counter, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. You know what I think? I think you look familiar. I think maybe I have seen you before up in Dallas, working at the Red Rose Saloon. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. The Red Rose. That was where she had worked, where she had done things she would never forgive herself for. You are mistaken, she said, but her voice was barely a whisper. I do not think I am, the man said, grinning. I think you are that pretty little thing who used to entertain upstairs. What are you doing working in a restaurant? This is not nearly as profitable, is it? Rose's worst nightmare was coming true. Her past was catching up with her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Get out, she said, trying to sound strong. Get out right now. The man reached across the counter and grabbed her wrist. Come on, sweetheart. For old time's sake, we can pay just like before. Rose tried to pull away, panic rising in her throat, but his grip was too strong. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could escape, the door slammed open with such force that it crashed against the wall. Fletcher filled the doorway, his massive frame radiating fury. His pale blue eyes were ice cold as they took in the scene. Rose struggling to free herself, the 3 drunk men surrounding her. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for someone his size, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He grabbed the man holding Rose by the back of his collar and physically lifted him off his feet, throwing him backward. The man crashed into a table, splintering it on impact. His companions started to move, but Fletcher turned on them with such menace that they froze. Leave, Fletcher said, his voice low and deadly. Now. This is not your business, Mountain Man, one of them started to say, but Fletcher cut him off. I am making it my business. You have 3 seconds to get out of here before I throw you out. And trust me, you do not want me to throw you out. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The 2 men still standing grabbed their companion and hauled him to his feet, practically dragging him out the door. Fletcher watched them go, every muscle in his body tense and ready, then turned to Rose. She was shaking, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. Fletcher's expression softened immediately. Are you hurt? He asked gently. Rose shook her head, unable to speak. The fear and shame and relief were too much, overwhelming her completely. She sank down onto a chair, burying her face in her hands, and sobbed. All the pain she had been holding back, all the shame and self-loathing and exhaustion, came pouring out in great, wrenching gasps. Fletcher stood there for a moment, clearly uncomfortable, then slowly, carefully, he knelt down beside her chair so his eyes were level with hers. Rose, he said quietly, you are safe now, they are gone. You heard, she managed between sobs. You heard what he said, about Dallas. About the saloon. Fletcher was silent for a moment. I heard. Fresh tears coursed down Rose's face. This was it. This was the moment he would walk away, when he would realize what she was and want nothing more to do with her. It is true, she whispered. All of it. I worked there. I did terrible things. I sold myself because I had no money and no choices, and I was desperate and scared, and I thought I could survive it, but I cannot. I cannot carry this shame anymore. It is killing me. She waited for his disgust, for his condemnation. But when she finally gathered the courage to look up at him through her tears, what she saw in his eyes was not disgust. It was compassion. "Rose," he said quietly, and the gentleness in his voice nearly broke her all over again. "We all do things we are not proud of when we are desperate. That does not define who you are." "It does," she said bitterly. "It defines me completely. I am ruined, worthless. No decent person would want anything to do with me if they knew." Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he took her hand in his much larger one. His palm was calloused and warm, and the simple contact steadied her. "You are not worthless," he said firmly. "You are a woman who survived something difficult and came out the other side. You are a woman who chose to build something better. That takes courage. That takes strength." Rose stared at him, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. "You do not understand. I am not a good woman. I have done things that good women do not do. Good and bad are not as simple as people like to think," Fletcher said. "I have done things I am not proud of too. I have killed men, Rose, in the war and after when I had no choice. Does that make me bad?" Rose shook her head. "That is different. You were protecting yourself or others. And you were protecting yourself too, surviving. There is no shame in that." His words were like water on parched earth, soaking into the dry, cracked places in her soul. Rose wanted desperately to believe him, but years of shame and self-condemnation made it hard. "How can you not be disgusted by me?" Fletcher's thumb brushed gently over her knuckles, and she shivered at the tenderness of the gesture. "Because I see you, Rose, not what you did, but who you are. And what I see is a woman with a good heart who is trying her best to do right. That is all anyone can ask." Rose felt something shift inside her chest, some tight, painful knot beginning to loosen. She looked into Fletcher's eyes and saw only sincerity, only acceptance. It was more than she had dared hope for, more than she thought she deserved. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. Fletcher's mouth curved in a small, rare smile. "Maybe because your past led you straight to me, and I am grateful for that." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Rose's breath caught as she realized what he was saying, what he was offering, not judgment, not condemnation, but acceptance, maybe even something more. "I do not understand," she said. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Fletcher said. "I know that you work hard and treat people with kindness. I know that you have been hurt, but you have not let it make you cruel. I know that when I see you, something in me recognizes something in you. Like calls to like, Rose. We are both people who have been broken and put ourselves back together." Rose felt fresh tears welling up, but these were different. These were tears of relief, of hope, of something that felt dangerously close to joy. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Fletcher said. He stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. "But it is late, and you have had a shock. Let me walk you to your room and make sure those men do not come back." Rose nodded, grateful for his presence, for his steady strength. She locked up the restaurant and let Fletcher escort her to the small room behind the kitchen. He checked the window locks and the door, ensuring everything was secure. "Will you be all right?" he asked, pausing in the doorway. Rose nodded. "Yes, thank you, Fletcher, for everything. For protecting me, for not judging me." Fletcher's expression was serious as he looked at her. "Your past is your past, Rose. It led you here, to this moment, to this place. Maybe that is exactly where you were meant to end up." He left before she could respond, and Rose sat down on her cot, her mind spinning. She replayed his words over and over, trying to understand, trying to believe. Your past led you straight to me. Could it be true? Could all the pain and shame and suffering have had a purpose, have been leading her toward something better? She thought about Fletcher, about the quiet strength in him, the acceptance he had shown her. She thought about how safe she felt in his presence, how seen. She had never felt that way with anyone before. The men in Dallas had seen only her body, only what she could give them, but Fletcher saw her, all of her, and he did not turn away. Sleep was a long time coming that night, but when it finally claimed her, Rose dreamed not of the past but of the future, of possibilities she had never dared imagine. Fletcher rode back to his cabin under the stars, his mind full of Rose. He had not planned to tell her how he felt, had not meant to reveal so much. But seeing her in danger, seeing her shame and pain had broken something open in him. He could not stand by and let her believe she was worthless. He could not let her carry that burden alone. He thought about what she had told him, about working in a saloon in Dallas, about selling herself to survive. It explained the shadows in her eyes, the careful way she held herself, and it made him respect her even more. She had done what she had to do to survive, and then she had found the strength to leave, to build something better. That was not weakness. That was courage of the highest order. Fletcher had seen plenty of death and suffering in his 30 years. He had fought in the final years of the war, had seen good men die for causes they barely understood. He had watched his parents waste away from fever, helpless to save them. He had learned early that life was hard and often unfair, and that the only thing a person could control was how they responded to it. Rose had responded by surviving, and then by trying to build something honest and good. That mattered far more to him than whatever she had done in Dallas. And the fact that she carried such shame for it, that she held herself to such high standards, told him everything he needed to know about her character. He wanted her. The realization settled over him with quiet certainty. He wanted her in his life, in his cabin, in his bed. He wanted to wake up next to her and work beside her, and know that she was his. The intensity of the feeling surprised him. He had never wanted anyone before, not like this. But Rose had somehow slipped past all his defenses and lodged herself firmly in his heart. The question was whether she could ever want him back. She was young and beautiful, and deserved someone who could give her comfort and security. All Fletcher had to offer was a rough cabin in the mountains, a hard life, and hands that knew better how to wield an axe than how to speak words of affection. But he could offer her acceptance. He could offer her safety. He could offer her a place where her past did not matter, where she could be whoever she wanted to be. Maybe that would be enough. The next morning, Rose woke early and went about her work with a strange sense of lightness. The shame that had weighed her down for so long felt less heavy, as though Fletcher's words had somehow lifted part of the burden. She caught herself smiling as she kneaded bread dough, and Martha noticed. "You seem happier this morning," the older woman observed. Rose felt her cheeks warm. "I suppose I am feeling a bit better." Martha studied her shrewdly. "Would this have anything to do with Fletcher Finch? I heard he was here last night after I left." Word traveled fast in a small town. Rose hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding it. "Some men came in causing trouble." "Fletcher helped me." "Helped you how?" "He made them leave. And then he stayed to make sure I was safe." Martha's expression softened. "That sounds like Fletcher. He does not talk much, but when he cares about something, he acts." She paused, then added gently, "He cares about you, Rose. Anyone with eyes can see it." Rose busied herself with the bread, not wanting to meet Martha's gaze. "He has been kind to me, but I am not looking for anything more than friendship." "Why not?" Martha asked. "You are young and unmarried. Fletcher is a good man." "There is nothing wrong with allowing yourself to be courted." "I am not suitable for courting," Rose said quietly. "I have made mistakes, Martha. Terrible mistakes. I do not deserve a good man's attention." Martha was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. We have all made mistakes, Rose. Every single one of us. The question is not whether you have made mistakes, but whether you learn from them and try to do better. From what I have seen, you are trying very hard to do better. Rose felt tears prick her eyes. You do not know what I have done. I do not need to know, Martha said. What matters is who you are now. And who you are now is a hard-working, honest young woman who deserves happiness just as much as anyone else. The words were similar to what Fletcher had said, and hearing them from Martha too made something shift in Rose's chest. Maybe it was true. Maybe she was not defined solely by her worst moments. Maybe she could be more than her mistakes. I will think about what you have said, Rose said finally. Martha patted her shoulder. That is all I ask. Now, let us get this bread in the oven before the breakfast crowd arrives. Fletcher did not come to town for the next week, and Rose found herself watching the door with increasing anxiety. Had she said something wrong? Had he changed his mind about her after thinking it over? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she hated how much his absence affected her. She had been alone for so long, had learned to rely on no one but herself. When had she started depending on the sight of his face to brighten her day? But on the following Saturday, Fletcher walked through the door just as Rose was serving breakfast to a table of ranch hands. Her heart leaped at the sight of him, and she had to remind herself to breathe. He looked the same as always, solid and strong, his long hair pulled back and his pale blue eyes scanning the room until they found her. He nodded, a small gesture of greeting, and chose his usual table. Rose finished serving the ranch hands, then approached Fletcher with coffee and a menu she knew he did not need. "Good morning," she said, willing her voice to stay steady. "Good morning, Rose." His eyes searched her face. "How have you been?" "Well, busy. The usual." She paused, gathering her courage. "I have not seen you in a while. Had some work to finish. New trapper moved into the territory, needed to establish boundaries." He paused. "I have been thinking about you, though." The admission made Rose's pulse quicken. "You have?" "Yes." Fletcher's gaze was direct, unflinching. "I meant what I said last week, Rose, about your past leading you to me. I have been thinking about that a lot." Rose glanced around the restaurant, aware that they were not exactly private. "Perhaps we could talk about this another time," Fletcher nodded. "Are you free tomorrow? Sunday?" "I have the afternoon off after the lunch service." "Then let me take you for a ride. I want to show you something." Rose knew she should say no, should maintain her distance, should protect herself from the possibility of more pain. But when she looked into Fletcher's eyes, all her carefully constructed walls crumbled. "Yes," she said softly, "I would like that." Fletcher's rare smile appeared, transforming his serious face. "I will come by at 2." Rose floated through the rest of the day in a daze of anticipation and nervousness. She had not been courted before, not properly. The men in Dallas had not courted her. They had paid her. This was different, and she had no idea how to navigate it. What did one wear on a ride with a mountain man? What did one talk about? Martha noticed her distraction and teased her gently, but there was approval in the older woman's eyes. "Fletcher is a good choice," she said. "Rough around the edges, but solid. The kind of man you can depend on." Rose wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that she could have something good, something real. But the fear lingered, whispering that she would ruin it somehow, that her past would poison anything beautiful before it had a chance to bloom. Sunday afternoon arrived too quickly and too slowly all at once. Rose changed into her best dress, a simple green cotton that brought out her eyes and pinned her hair up carefully. She studied her reflection and tried to see what Fletcher saw when he looked at her. Not a fallen woman, not a saloon girl, just Rose, just herself. Fletcher arrived precisely at 2, leading 2 horses. One was the sturdy mule he used for hauling supplies, but the other was a beautiful bay mare with kind eyes. He had cleaned up, Rose noticed. His hair was freshly washed and neatly tied back, and he wore what was clearly his best shirt. "She is beautiful," Rose said, approaching the mare carefully. "What is her name?" "She does not have one. I just acquired her last week. I thought you might like to name her." Rose looked at him in surprise. "You bought a horse for me." Fletcher's expression was slightly embarrassed. "I thought if we were going to spend time together, you would need your own mount. I cannot have you riding the mule." The gesture touched her deeply. No one had ever bought her anything before, certainly not something as significant as a horse. "Thank you," she whispered. "That is incredibly kind." "You can think about the name," Fletcher said, helping her into the saddle with a steadying hand. His touch was brief but gentle, and Rose felt warmth spread through her at the contact. They rode west out of town, toward the hills where Fletcher made his home. The September afternoon was warm but not oppressively hot, and the landscape was beautiful in a stark, wild way. Fletcher pointed out landmarks and told her about the land, about the wildlife and the plants and the best places to find water. Rose listened, fascinated by his knowledge and the quiet passion in his voice when he talked about his mountains. After about an hour, they crested a rise and Fletcher drew his horse to a stop. Below them spread a valley, green with grass and dotted with wildflowers. A small stream ran through the center, glinting silver in the sunlight, and on a slight rise overlooking the stream stood a cabin, solid and well built with a small corral and a garden plot beside it. "Is that your home?" Rose asked. Fletcher nodded. "Built it myself 5 years ago. It is not fancy, but it is sturdy. Keeps out the weather." Rose studied the cabin, trying to imagine what it would be like to live there, so far from town, so isolated. "Do you ever get lonely?" "I did not used to," Fletcher said quietly. "But lately, yes. I have been thinking it would be nice to have someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share things with." He was looking at her as he said it, and Rose felt her breath catch. "Fletcher." "I am not good with words, Rose," he said, turning his horse to face her so they were looking directly at each other. "So I am just going to say this plain. I want to court you. I want to see if we can build something together. I know I do not have much to offer. I live rough and I work hard and I am not the easiest man to be around. But I can promise you this. I will never judge you for your past. I will never use it against you. With me, you can be whoever you want to be, and that will be enough." Rose felt tears welling up and she did not bother to hide them. "Why me? You could have anyone. A woman without my history, without my shame." Fletcher leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes intense. "Because I do not want anyone else. I want you. Your strength, your kindness, your courage. The fact that you have survived hard things and came out still trying to be good. That is what I see when I look at you, Rose. Not shame, not mistakes, just a woman worth knowing, worth caring about." "I am afraid," Rose whispered. "I am afraid that I will disappoint you. That you will realize I am not who you think I am." "Then let me be afraid too," Fletcher said. "I am afraid you will realize that I am just a man who lives in the woods and does not know how to talk pretty or buy you nice things. I'm afraid I will not be enough for you. But I am willing to try anyway if you are." Rose looked at him, at this strong, solid man who was offering her everything she had thought she could never have. Acceptance, respect, the possibility of love, and she realized that her past had led her here to this moment, to this man. Not as punishment, but as grace, as a second chance she had never dared hope for. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I am willing to try." Fletcher's face transformed with a smile so bright and genuine that it took her breath away. He dismounted and came to help her down from her horse, and when her feet touched the ground, he kept his hands on her waist, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. "Can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. Rose nodded, unable to speak. Fletcher bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when his lips touched hers, it was gentle and sweet and nothing like any kiss she had ever experienced. It was not demanding or possessive. It was a question and a promise all at once. And when he pulled back, Rose felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. "Come see the cabin," Fletcher said, taking her hand. "I want to show you everything." They spent the afternoon exploring his homestead. Fletcher showed her the cabin, explaining how he had built it, the clever ways he had designed it to stay warm in winter and cool in summer. He showed her his workshop, filled with tools and half-finished projects. He showed her the garden where he grew vegetables, and the smokehouse where he preserved meat, and the small root cellar where he stored supplies for the winter. Everything was neat and well-maintained, the work of a man who took pride in what he built. Rose could see herself here, she realized with surprise. She could imagine cooking in that kitchen, tending that garden, sitting on the porch in the evening watching the sun set over the valley. "What do you think?" Fletcher asked as they stood on the porch, looking out over his land. "I think it is beautiful," Rose said honestly. "I think you have built something wonderful here." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want you to know that I am not expecting anything from you, Rose. I know courting takes time. I am willing to wait as long as you need. I just want the chance to show you that you can trust me, that you can be safe with me." Rose turned to look at him, this man who kept surprising her with his gentleness and understanding. "I want to trust you," she said. "I want to believe that this is real. But I have never had anything good before, Fletcher. I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I," Fletcher admitted, "but maybe we can figure it out together." It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Fletcher began coming to town twice a week, always timing his visits to coincide with Rose's breaks so they could take walks together or sit on the church steps and talk. Rose learned about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever, about the war and the things he had seen that still haunted him sometimes. Fletcher learned about Rose's mother and her father's gambling, about the debts that had consumed her after his death, about the desperate choices she had made when every door seemed closed. They were both broken people, scarred by life, but somehow their broken pieces seemed to fit together. Fletcher's quiet strength gave Rose the safety she needed to begin healing. Rose's gentle presence brought warmth into Fletcher's solitary existence. They were careful with each other, patient, taking time to build trust. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Desdemona, nothing went unnoticed. Some people approved, particularly Martha, who beamed with satisfaction every time Fletcher came into the restaurant. Others were more skeptical, whispering about the strange mountain man and the mysterious woman from Dallas. But Fletcher and Rose paid them no mind. They were too absorbed in discovering each other. 3 months after that first ride to his cabin, Fletcher asked Rose if she would come stay the weekend, properly chaperoned by Martha, who agreed to accompany them. He wanted Rose to really experience what life in the mountains would be like, he explained, before they made any permanent decisions. Rose agreed, both nervous and excited. The weekend was a revelation. Rose helped Martha prepare meals on Fletcher's wood stove, learning to work with the simpler equipment. She tended his garden, delighting in the feel of earth beneath her fingers. She helped him feed the animals and gather eggs from his chickens and draw water from the well. The work was hard but satisfying in a way that restaurant work had never been. This was building something, creating a life, not just earning wages. And in the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out, and Fletcher told her stories about the mountains and the animals, and Rose told him about books she had read and dreams she had once had. Martha watched them with approval, seeing how easily they moved around each other, how naturally they fit. On Sunday evening, as they prepared to ride back to town, Fletcher pulled Rose aside. "What did you think?" he asked. "Could you see yourself living here?" Rose looked around at the cabin, the mountains, the vast sky. "I could," she said slowly. "But Fletcher, are you sure about this? About me? I do not want you to wake up one day and regret choosing someone like me." Fletcher took both her hands in his pale blue eyes serious. "Rose Sullivan, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Your past does not scare me. It does not change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more, because I know what it took for you to survive it and come out the other side. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Rose felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Fletcher, I will marry you." Fletcher let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Rose could hear his heart pounding, could feel the strength in his arms, and she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. They married a month later, in a small ceremony at the church in Desdemona. Martha stood as Rose's witness, and Fletcher's neighbor, an older rancher named Tom Matthews, stood for him. Rose wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Fletcher wore his best clothes, his long hair neatly brushed, and his face clean shaven for the occasion. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the union, Rose held her breath, half expecting someone to stand up and denounce her, to reveal her past to everyone present. But the church remained silent, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Fletcher kissed her gently while the small congregation clapped. At the reception in Martha's restaurant, Rose overheard two of the town women whispering. "I heard she worked in a saloon in Dallas," one said. "Well, she seems respectable enough now," the other replied. "And Fletcher Finch is a good judge of character. If he chose her, she must be worth choosing." The words were small, but they meant everything to Rose. She was being given a chance, a fresh start. The past would always be part of her story, but it did not have to define her future. That night, Fletcher carried her over the threshold of his cabin, their cabin now, and set her down gently in the main room. Rose looked around at the space that was now her home, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. "Are you frightened?" Fletcher asked softly, seeing her expression. Rose considered the question. "A little," she admitted. "But not of you, never of you. I am just not sure I know how to be a wife. How to be good at this." Fletcher pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in that way that always made her feel protected. "We will learn together," he said, "just like we have been learning everything else together." And they did learn, slowly and patiently. Fletcher was gentle with Rose, understanding that her experiences in Dallas had left scars that needed time to heal. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she was ready to give. And gradually, Rose learned that intimacy could be beautiful, that it could be an expression of love rather than a transaction or a source of shame. Their first winter together was hard but wonderful. The snow came early and heavy, isolating them in their mountain valley for weeks at a time. But Rose did not mind the isolation. She spent her days keeping the cabin warm and making it a home, sewing curtains and braiding rugs and learning to bake bread in the wood stove. Fletcher spent his days hunting and trapping, providing meat and furs that they could trade in town come spring. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Rose reading aloud from the books Fletcher had bought her for Christmas while he carved or mended tools. Sometimes they would talk for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams and memories. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. One evening in February, as a blizzard howled outside, Rose set down her book and looked at Fletcher. "I have been thinking about something," she said. Fletcher looked up from the leather harness he was repairing. "What is that?" "I have been thinking about my past, about Dallas, and I have realized something. I spent so long being ashamed of what I did there, so long hating myself for those choices. But if I had not made those choices, if I had not survived that way, I would never have had the strength to leave. I would never have come to Desdemona. I would never have met you." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "You were right, Fletcher. My past led me straight to you. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Everything I went through, as terrible as it was, made me into someone who could appreciate what we have. Someone who knows the difference between using and loving, between surviving and living. I would not wish those experiences on anyone, but I am not ashamed of them anymore. They are part of my story, and my story led me here." Fletcher set down the harness and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair. "I am proud of you," he said quietly, "for surviving, for fighting, for choosing to keep going even when it must have seemed impossible. And I am grateful, every single day, that your path crossed mine." Rose cupped his face in her hands, looking into those pale blue eyes that had been the first to see her as something more than her mistakes. "I love you, Fletcher Finch. I did not think I was capable of loving anyone, but you proved me wrong. You prove me wrong every day. I love you too, Rose, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." They kissed, and then Fletcher carried her to their bed, and they made love slowly and tenderly while the storm raged outside. And Rose thought about how far she had come, from the terrified, ashamed woman who stepped off the stagecoach in Desdemona to the loved, valued wife she was now. The journey had been painful, but it had been worth it. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new life. Rose discovered she was pregnant in April, when the wildflowers were blooming across the valley. She told Fletcher one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the joy on his face made her heart overflow. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He placed his large, calloused hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Rose asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Fletcher said. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Thank you, Rose, for this, for everything, for choosing to trust me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for seeing me," Rose whispered, "for seeing past all the things I was ashamed of and finding something worth loving." Their son was born in December, during the first snowfall of winter. The birth was long and difficult, with only Fletcher and Martha in attendance. But when Rose finally held her baby in her arms, she knew that every moment of pain had been worth it. They named him James, after Fletcher's father, and he was perfect, with his father's pale blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Fletcher was a wonderful father, patient and gentle despite his rough exterior. Rose would often find him sitting in the rocking chair he had built, holding James and talking to him in that quiet, steady voice, telling him stories about the mountains and the animals. And she would watch them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst, and marvel at how her life had transformed. 2 years later they had a daughter, Sarah, who had Rose's green eyes and Fletcher's determined chin. And 3 years after that, another son, Daniel, who was sunny and cheerful from the moment he entered the world. Their cabin rang with the sounds of children's laughter, and Rose, who had once believed she was too tainted to deserve happiness, found herself living a life richer than any she had imagined. The townspeople of Desdemona had long since accepted her as one of their own. She and Fletcher came to town once a month for supplies, and Rose always stopped to visit with Martha, who had become like a mother to her. Sometimes people would ask about her past, having heard rumors, and Rose had learned to answer simply and without shame. "I made some difficult choices when I was younger," she would say. "Choices I am not proud of, but they led me to my husband and my children, and I would not trade this life for anything." And people respected that. They saw how happy she and Fletcher were, how well they worked together, how their children thrived. Whatever Rose had been before, she was clearly a good wife and mother now, and that was what mattered. On their 10th anniversary, Fletcher surprised Rose by taking her back to the spot where he had first proposed, the rise overlooking their valley. The children were spending the night with Martha in town, giving them a rare evening alone together. "You remember what I said to you here?" Fletcher asked as they stood watching the sunset. "You said my past led me straight to you," Rose said, smiling at the memory. "And you said I could be whoever I wanted to be with you, and that would be enough. You still believe that?" Rose turned to look at her husband. 10 years of marriage had added some gray to his long hair and some lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome and strong as the day they met. "I believe it more than ever," she said. "You gave me the gift of a new beginning, Fletcher. You loved me when I could not love myself. You saw worth in me when I thought I was worthless. You built me a home and gave me a family and showed me what real love looks like. How could I not believe it?" Fletcher pulled her close, and they stood there together as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. "I was so lonely before you," he said quietly. "I did not even realize how lonely I was, but you filled all the empty places, Rose. You made my house a home. You gave my life purpose and meaning. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Rose felt tears on her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I used to think my past had ruined me," she said. "I used to think I was broken beyond repair. But you showed me that broken things can be mended, that mistakes do not have to be permanent, that grace and love can heal even the deepest wounds. You saved me, Fletcher." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected gently. He took her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with all the love and devotion that had only grown deeper over the years. "You saved me from loneliness and isolation. You taught me how to love and be loved. You gave me family and purpose. We are better together than we ever could have been apart." They kissed as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, two people who had found each other against all odds, whose broken pasts had led them to a beautiful future. Over the years that followed, Rose and Fletcher's family continued to grow and thrive. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Sarah inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's determination, becoming a teacher in Desdemona when she was old enough. Daniel remained the sunny heart of the family, always ready with a joke or a smile. Rose never forgot where she had come from, the dark days in Dallas that had tested her in ways she never wanted to repeat, but she no longer carried shame about them. Instead, she carried gratitude for the strength they had given her, for the lessons they had taught her about survival and resilience and the preciousness of second chances. Sometimes, when young women came to town running from difficult pasts, Rose would find ways to help them, to offer the same grace and acceptance that had been offered to her. She became known as someone who did not judge, who understood that people's circumstances did not always reflect their character. And many women found new beginnings in Desdemona because Rose was willing to see past their mistakes to the potential underneath. Fletcher supported her in this work, understanding that helping others helped Rose continue to heal from her own past. Their cabin became a place of refuge, a safe haven where people could rest and recover and remember that they were more than their worst moments. And through it all, their love remained constant and true. They were partners in every sense of the word, working side by side to build their life, to raise their children, to make their corner of the world a little bit better. They had their disagreements and challenges, as all couples do, but they faced them together, with honesty and respect and the deep trust they had built over years of commitment. On a warm summer evening, when Rose was 62 and Fletcher 65, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown and had families of their own, scattered across Texas, but staying connected through regular visits. The cabin was quiet, just the two of them again, the way it had started. "You have any regrets?" Fletcher asked, reaching over to take Rose's hand. Rose thought about the question, really considered it. She thought about the girl she had been, scared and alone in Dallas, making choices that nearly destroyed her. She thought about the woman she had become, loved and valued, surrounded by family and purpose. "No," she said finally. "Not one. Even the hard parts, even the parts that hurt, they all led me here. To you, to this life. How could I regret anything that brought me home?" Fletcher squeezed her hand, his touch still strong and sure after all these years. "Home," he repeated softly. "That is exactly what you are to me, Rose. You always have been. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were my home." They sat together as the sun set over the mountains. Two souls who had found each other in the wilderness, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces, who had proven that the past did not have to dictate the future. Rose thought about the younger version of herself, the woman ashamed of her past mistakes, and wished she could tell her that everything would be all right, that the pain would lead to purpose, that shame would transform into strength. But maybe, in a way, she did tell her. Every time Rose helped another woman escaping a difficult past, every time she shared her story without shame, every time she lived her life with love and grace and gratitude, she was sending a message back through time. You will survive this. You will find love. You will build something beautiful. Your past will lead you straight to where you need to be. As the stars began to appear in the deepening twilight, Fletcher stood and offered Rose his hand. "Come to bed," he said gently. "Tomorrow is a new day." Rose took his hand and stood, looking up at the man who had changed her life, who had shown her that love was patient and kind and healing. "Tomorrow is a new day," she agreed, "but I am grateful for all the yesterdays that brought us here." They walked into the cabin together, hand in hand, ready for whatever the future would bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together. And in the mountains of Texas, under a sky full of stars, two hearts that had been broken and healed beat as one, testament to the truth that the past, no matter how painful, could lead to something extraordinary when met with grace, acceptance, and love. The years continued to pass gently for Fletcher and Rose. They grew old together in their mountain cabin, watching their grandchildren grow and their legacy expand. Rose's story became known throughout the region, not as a cautionary tale but as an inspiration. She was the woman who had survived, who had refused to let her past define her, who had built something beautiful from ashes. And Fletcher remained what he had always been: her rock, her shelter, her home. The mountain man who had looked past shame and mistake to see the woman underneath, who had offered acceptance when she needed it most, who had proven that love was not about perfection, but about commitment. Their love story became legend in Desdemona, passed down through generations as an example of how grace and second chances could transform lives. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Fletcher had spoken on a rise overlooking their valley so many years ago. Rose's past had led her straight to him, and he was grateful for every step of the journey that brought her home.